Hey there, my name's Joe Keyboard, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. This week's episode, I talked to Ariana Wegley of the band Spaceport. In early March, Spaceport put out their debut record, Window Seat, a dreamy pop expanse of synths, guitars, and strings. We talk about Ariana's musical upbringing as a classically trained cellist and moving into this looser, pop-based musical world. It's Spaceport, and they're right here on the Ear Coffee Podcast. Ariana, how's it going?
It's going well. Yeah, it's first day of summer. It's feeling warm, feeling warm and bright and different than last week.
So nice being able to see sunshine and feel, just some actual weather as opposed to just sadness and snow.
Yeah, to be like to feel like the air entering my bones or something. I don't know. I'm feeling a sort of expansion, which is like strange to me, but also really nice.
Yeah. Well, cool. And so I always ask every band we have on the podcast about the same question, which is, what's your one sentence descriptor for Spaceport? It's kind of that log line that you either tell a family member at like Thanksgiving or your coworker who's like, "Oh, you play in a band? What's that like?" Or what's Spaceport? And you're just kind of like, "This is kind of what it is," and we can move on from the conversation, you know?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. I've been thinking about that ever since we released it about a month ago because it's like hard to explain music. But I guess in the most simplest, barest way, I'd say indie rock. But I have been using this little blurb for myself as like earthbound space music because when I think of like all the arrangements and like textures and like feelings that have gone into it, it's kind of like an ethereal, like otherworldly quality and also like a groundedness. So I feel like kind of like also, a lot of synths and a lot of like natural string instruments like kind of informs me of the kind of like quality of the sound. And that's how I would describe it, I suppose. Earthbound space music.
I like that because it does have this like fuzzy kind of extra expansiveness while still having the like organic texture that comes with kind of the soft pop nature of the record.
Yeah. And like, where it's like soft pop, synth pop, like I've heard it described as lo-fi bedroom pop, which I guess like all these different ways of describing it kind of like help to deepen like the whole, I don't know, sense of everything that's going on. But it's also in that territory where it's like you got to use a lot of words.
Yeah.
It might sound ridiculous.
It's funny because I regularly define music by the time of day I would listen to it. Because so I feel like I put on Window Seat, I would either put it on like morning or evening, kind of that like transition period in the day, just because it's like this almost this, and we'll talk about this a little more later. Obviously the record, but it feels like it's this like gentle transition in between times of day that I just love those kind of records.
Yeah, that's cool. That's funny. I've been enjoying like finding it on the radio in my day-to-day life. And that's when I hear it. It's usually like at 11 a.m. or something. It's kind of like when you're like getting into morning, afternoon. Yeah, like times of transition during the day. Just like thinking about like cycles of a day or
Yeah. Well, moving on, talk to me about your history with music because you do a lot more. You've got a much more of a musical history than just, making this kind of soft pop music, this bedroom pop music, because you're a cellist and you worked at the Delphia Cello Quartet, if I pronounced that right, along with like making your own kind of ambient, more experimental electronic music. So kind of give me the historical rundown of Ariana, your musical history.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I started playing cello when I was in elementary school in 4th grade because it was offered as like a music block option. We have like choir, band, and orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And I was inspired to do cello because I had been like listening to my dad's first gen iPod, kind of like secretly, and I would like find these recordings of uh Yo-Yo Ma's first recordings of the Bach cello suites. And I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that I loved the sound and that I would like hope to make a similar sound some way, somehow. And then I just like linked that with the cello, and I was like, okay, that's definitely what I want to do. And then from there, I started taking private lessons pretty early on, and got serious about it early in life. That was like my main creative outlet growing up. Ever since then, that's like where I did all my experimentation and all my kind of like research or something into like growing up as a kid. And like I almost quit at a couple of years after playing it because I was feeling kind of overwhelmed. But a funny story is that I found a Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest like instrumental like Hal Leonard sheet music book.
Yeah.
And I just was like, oh wow, I love playing instrumental music that I remember from movies. And things that were like more recognizable to me than like some like I don't know, traditional tunes that I was practicing as a young player. And yeah, I played with youth orchestras growing up. I played with string quartets, piano trios, woodwind quintets, like all sorts of string and woodwind and piano combinations until, college. And ended up studying cello performance at the University of Minnesota. And kind of like was on track to continue that into maybe grad school or like start auditioning for professional orchestras. And was like kind of at this point in my life, the last few years since graduating, I was either going to have to like really like crack down on my schedule and basically like only play cello, or shift into like making my own music and not relying on being in a professional ensemble. And yeah, I am also a music teacher. I have been teaching private cello lessons for about 8 years. And that's been my like most continuous primary way of like having a job. And I also work with kids at a Waldorf school in Minneapolis and help with their strings program. But yeah, I think in my personal kind of creative musical life, I was like, I guess I'll have to make my own music and kind of go from there. And since then, I've continued playing in like small chamber groups, but I haven't really, since graduating, been able to play with like an orchestra, or I haven't kind of like made room for that actively in my life, and I do miss that. Okay. But I also enjoy a non-orchestral environment. I feel like there's a lot of pressures that come with the tradition of doing that, and there's a lot of expectations and a lot of kind of requirements of the kind of lifestyle and kind of person that you like approach that with. And it's all like kind of comes like phases in and out. And when I associate like my musical like lineage or my musical influences and stuff, it all kind of like blends together in a cool way of like appreciation, but also a need to just be trying new things. And kind of like I hesitate to use the word departure from cello, but also it is kind of like a change of lanes, so to speak.
Mm.
I don't feel like I'm a kind of like leaving anything behind. I'm definitely taking everything I've ever done with me, but it's like a kind of a deliberate, like starting over in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How quickly were you writing music within kind of this, working especially in the world of like a very classical, and it's rigid is maybe not the right word, but like you said, there's a different set of standards and expectations. 'Cause like I play trombone, and playing in wind bands and stuff like that was I didn't have as much fun as I did do playing trombone within like the pop context of the band I play in
Yeah.
now. And so having like that almost a little more freedom. But how quickly were you writing and kind of experimenting with your own creativity? Or how quickly did you start doing that once you started kind of getting your roots within playing as a cellist? Because you've written music that aren't exclusively on your
Mhm.
instrument.
Well, that happened like just before the pandemic.
Mhm.
I got turned on to microcorgs, and I
Okay.
found a really good deal on Craigslist and got a microcorg, and I also got an amp and
Mm.
was just like playing synth in my apartment for fun, and just like making like weird sounds and not having any idea. I'm like an anti-manual person. I like don't read the manuals.
Yeah.
And like I got the manual for that synth and I was like, okay, I can't comprehend this. I'm just gonna like feel it. I'm just gonna
Mhm.
feel it out. And that led to like a lot of experimentation, and it's like a totally new territory, like in terms of like textures and my own abilities to like play uh musically. I don't
Yeah.
know, and to just like come up with ideas on a just like a different plane too. Like a keyboard is feels like a totally different plane than a cello.
Mhm.
um so I just kind of like got into recording like little melodies and
Mhm.
little like weird sounds and putting them together, and like I don't know, making a recording on GarageBand and just like overdubbing. And then I got this free trial of Ableton Live,
Mhm.
and it was about to expire. And during the last week, and this is at this point, it's like a little bit further into the pandemic. Um, and I was like, okay, I got to do something with this before I consider buying it. Um, and I was like reading a lot of William Blake, and I decided to to record like a song for each body part mentioned in William Blake's poem "The Tiger."
Okay.
And then I just kind of went kind of crazy, and then I recorded an album in a week and put it on Bandcamp like under my name.
Mhm.
And that was also a time when I was just kind of recording weird synth stuff, and then eventually I decided I wanted to learn guitar
Mm.
2 years ago in the summer, and just got so obsessed with figuring stuff out on like I said, like a totally different plane. It's like unrecognizable to me, even though it's a string instrument. And I'm bringing like certain like muscular skills and
Mm.
experience from cello. It was just like so new and expansive to me, and that was really like a important time when I started like writing with lyrics too. I feel
Mm.
like the guitar kind of motivated me to um, write lyrics and to sing, and I hadn't really sung until then. So yeah, just really the last couple, like the last 2 years have been like I just literally can't stop thinking about music
Yeah.
in like in terms of like little, yeah, finding like thinking about weird sounds and um putting them together to like create a song. It's just something
Mhm.
that's always on my mind since then. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then you'd already been releasing music under your own name. What made you want to start working under the title of Spaceport? Is it because the songs were so different, or kind of what was the desire to kind of transition from that?
a big part of it was that I think my name is too funny to like go by my or like Ariana Wegley. I just thought it was like kind of goofy sounding.
Mm.
That's like a funny story. Or like it was just like a personal like, oh, I think I want to go by something that's like also not tied to like any kind of preconceived notions I have about myself or like my name.
Mm.
You know, like when I think of my name, it's like, oh, I have a lot of that's me. You know,
Yeah.
I think of like Spaceport, I think of like a project, kind of like a certain kind of sound or a certain kind of like feelings going into like its own thing. And so it's like its own world. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like its own world that I think is like kind of self-contained, but is also like growing and mysterious and like kind of like out of my control,
Mm.
but like also like nurtured by me. And so it's cool. It's like its own, yeah, its own thing that I feel like I have like a very deep connection with, but I like not identifying it just by my name. And also
Mm.
it's like, yeah, Todd and Liam who are in the band as well. Like I like having a project or like a band name that kind of encompasses something that's like beyond our individual selves. And like we put all that, we put everything into something that becomes its own thing. And I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah,
It also kind of lifts the pressure off of you a little bit too, because I know a lot of these songs were, I mean, almost all of these songs were written by you. Obviously, Todd and Liam had hands in the recording process, but moving it from your name kind of gives you an extra level of anonymity, or like shares both
totally.
the glory and the blame almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a neutral party or something. It's like, yeah, it's nice to, yeah, not feel the pressure of your
Mm.
name. Yeah, I agree.
So the album is called Window Seat. It was released last month, in early March. Talk to me about writing this record, because the press release you sent out, it was kind of written over this lonely year you had. And so talk to me about working on the record and writing the record.
Yeah. The record started as kind of like this thing I would do for fun. Like I mentioned, I was kind of experimenting a lot,
Mm.
like writing kind of like random one-off songs. And um, I would send them to my partner, Todd, who plays drums in Spaceport. And that was just like a fun thing I would do.
Mhm.
And I had this like synth melody and I was like, okay, I'm going to make this sound I'm just going to turn this into a pop song. It was sort
Mm.
of like an ambient electronic thing, I guess. And then I was like, okay, I'll put like garage band drums in it and just kind of like write some lyrics and write a song. And that turned out to be Hey Neighbor, which is the first track
Mhm.
on the album. And yeah, I sent it to Todd. I sent the draft, which is like almost identical in terms of like structure and lyrics. And like also the sounds are pretty synonymous with what's on like the final cut. But I sent it to Todd and he was like, hey, this is actually really good. Or like, hey, this is good. I'm gonna like play live drums on this and send it
Mm.
back to you. So then he played live drums on it, sent it back, and I was like, hey, that sounds like a real song. And then a couple more times that happened, I think, with a song Another Day,
Mm.
and maybe a couple other ones I can't remember, but eventually like I kind of had this idea to produce that song in like a more fully formed way to kind of see if I had inspiration to do a whole album.
Mm.
So I worked with Matt Olson, who's also in Robot Slide. And he helped me kind of like re-record some synth parts in his studio. And like, we just kind of like, I don't know, took what I had already recorded. Some of it I'd already recorded in my house. So we just kind of like mapped it on in his studio, but we kind of like fleshed out that song
Mm.
with a little bit more high production value or something.
Yeah.
And then it was like, we need a bass. We need a bass part. Or like I really wanted to kind of like fill out that because we had synths and drums. And then Liam played kind of like this bass riff that I had composed. And it just like, yeah, it just kind of became a song. And then that was really inspiring. And I was like, okay, I'm going to like decide to like get all my other songs in this kind of shape, or I'm going to like maybe just dedicate myself to like writing a set of songs and playing them as a band. But yeah, it had a kind of like a very natural, a very natural like flow from like some kind of like idea that was very much just stuck in my head, living there for a while, that like grew into something real, and that's some like real instruments people were playing. And yeah, a nice meeting of the minds too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So what years were these kind of growing over? Was this, pandemic, a little bit past? Kind of what was the time frame here?
Yeah. So I kind of I wrote Hey Neighbor at the end of 2020.
Okay.
And then this, when I kind of like re-recorded some parts and worked on some production stuff with Matt, was end of 2021 into early 2022.
Okay.
So January 2022, maybe February of that year too, that's when I decided that I kind of wanted to make a whole album.
Gotcha. And so you had Hey Neighbor that became, you had the meeting of the minds that became a song that you're just like, this is something here. How many other tracks from the record did you have, kind of ideas, or at least some parts written? Or was it more of a, we got one, I will start writing? Or did you have that catalog already kind of worked on a little bit that you could, keep assembling?
Yeah, at that point, I had like written the lyrics for Another Day and Realer Than, which are two other songs on the album. And then that spring, I'm pretty sure that I wrote Submarine. And then in the summer, it was like Window Seat, Little Grain of Sand, Radio Shack, or someone at Radio Shack looks exactly like me, and Close Call as well. So that those kind of like, I had ideas brewing for those songs, but they didn't like, that was kind of like me fleshing them out on my, a little bit more on my own throughout the spring into late summer / early fall of 2022. And then bringing the band together and working out drum and bass parts. And I recorded all that stuff for all my parts and bass in my apartment in a very hot room that I'm sitting in right now. And also Todd recorded all his drums at his studio that he shares with Matt. Yeah.
So listening through Window Seat, it almost feels like I've like found a journal that like every other page has been written or like ripped out of, based on, the way you've written. And a big part of that, I feel like, not only is the lyrics, but the way you orchestrate and arrange a lot of the, not only, your basic drums, bass, guitar, but a lot of the other kind of elements of those songs, from samples to the more electronic and kind of ambient textures. So, my question in all of this, kind of talk to me about your brain, what's going on in your brain as you're working on trying to make this all into one cohesive, project. What's your thinking? Obviously, you're not going to have a one size fits all approach to every song, but kind of what's your goal? What are you always aiming towards as you're putting things in, like some of the more synthetic parts, or throwing a cello on, or throwing in a sample of like a voice memo recording? Kind of what's going on there?
Yeah. I ask myself that every day. No, I thinking about like, basically for any song, I like when there's like a lot of different I don't know, maybe this is like my classical music brain, but
Mhm.
like movements, kind of like
Yeah.
movements within, like kind of like how sections transition, or kind of like feelings of, like fast, slow, fast, or like, I don't know, think like kind of like thinking of, because I don't actually use a lot of tempo changes in my music, or like a lot of like, yeah, pacing, but like
Mm.
the feeling can feel kind of like that, or like I want this to feel like energetic. I want this to feel more laid back. I want these kind of like fluctuations
Mm.
of like, yeah, like you said, how something might flow throughout the day where you feel certain kinds of like tension.
Mm.
Like a big thing for me in music is like, yeah, the building and the release of tension,
Mm.
whether that be like through rhyme in lyrics, or like leading tones in
Yeah.
chords and stuff. Yeah. And I think like um the where I usually start is um I had kind of a phase of always starting on the on synths, kind of
Mm.
like thinking of like a melody, because like the melodies were coming naturally to me around the time when I was like writing these songs, which is, yeah, early 2022. Yeah. Um, but I think that um something that was good for me, but also kind of like felt like it took a long time, is I'd have an idea on synth and then I'd kind of scrap it and like be like, okay, I'm going to trust my memory to remember what was good about that and try it on guitar
Mhm.
and be like, oh, okay, like changing the instrumentation is like a pretty big deal for how I like remember what feels right to me.
Okay.
Like if it sticks, if it's something kind of like sounds right on cello and it still sounds right on guitar, I don't know. Sometimes that kind of like leads me in a direction. Um, and I think like also I really like when music is kind of confusing or kind of fragmented, or like meaning is distorted, or like you can kind of find all these different like fractures in something and it's kind of ambiguous but kind of leading you in a direction. So like thinking of maybe kind of a scene or like a landscape or an image when I'm writing
Mhm.
music, it's kind of like helpful for me to visualize something, because then I can kind of like figure out how I want that to sound in terms of like um music. Like Close Call, for example, that song is like pretty explicitly in my mind about the Matrix. And so like I was visually like really like thinking of, yeah, the Matrix when I was
Mm.
writing that. And that was like an example of me kind of like having an idea uh of a picture, I guess, and
Mhm.
like just kind of like finding the right sounds and words that made me think about it in a certain kind of way. Um but yeah, I think something that's helpful for me, especially with like cello cello background, is that I don't write music with starting from the cello usually. And
Okay.
but I kind of like think in cello, like I rationalize things like along those kind of planes that I was mentioning before,
Mhm.
kind of like the use of like my right and left hand, or like sides or like parts of my body, or just kind of how I like sing too. Like the cello range is very close to the human voice. Like a
Mhm.
lot of times I'll kind of like conflate the two or something when I'm thinking um about that. But I like uh yeah, I kind of have to like not start with cello when I'm
Mm.
writing like a pop song, and then be like, okay, now how do I like support this with cello, or like totally change it with cello? But yeah, does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No,
It's
that make
it's kind of a whirlwind of ideas and feelings, and like it's different every time. It's
yeah.
yeah.
But that idea of like working in like almost movements makes a whole lot of sense. Like listening to this record, because the big one that I wrote down was that last third of Reeler Than, where it opens up into this like disco beat, and
Mhm.
the whole tone, it like becomes a little more weightless in its whole approach as you like finish out that track. That tracks totally.
Yeah. We're having kind of like yeah, just being like, oh, I want to at some point throw like a disco beat in there.
Yeah.
Like, where am I going to find the perfect
Mm.
spot to do that? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like being willing to try things too. I mean, there's a lot of these songs kind of like talking about drums and beats and stuff. I would make these like really weird like garage band and like Logic beats, and then Todd would like bring it bring it home. He'd bring it back to reality and like kind of like make it sound real, you know? And like same with the bass too, like that kind of like, I don't know, kind of I think something that matters a lot to me is like a groove or like a hook or like melodies that like kind of like stay in your head. And that's kind of like I feel like every song has something kind of like that I kind of like was excited about and really got filled in, you know, got kind of like supported by all the other instruments. Yeah.
Awesome. Did this process, kind of this crafting and curating of each song, how was that process when handing it over to Andrew Jensen, who performs as Loud Son, to mix this record? Because something that I didn't really realize was how much a record's feel and mood and vibe changes mix to mix. And so like being like, all right, I've crafted this, I've really worked on like my synths and fitting in all these instruments together, and then you're handing it off. Were you pretty instrumental in that, or was it more of like Andrew gets what I'm going for and I can kind of trust that?
Yeah, that's such a big component of like the work as a whole and how everyone it like really is like a team of people. And even when it's like a very close kind of like DIY way of doing it too, you know, like you kind of you have people bringing like their own kind of expertise. I remember like being early in this project and being like, oh yeah, I'm going to mix it myself. And I'm going to master it myself. And I'm going to figure all this stuff out, and being like, okay, absolutely no way is that going to work. I can't wrap my head around it. And like trusting someone to like, I don't know. Yeah. Lend their expertise and their ears and their like their own musical opinions to kind of like, I don't know, do kind of like wrap it up in this package. I don't know, to like make it whole is like, takes a lot of communication and a lot of trust. And I like Andrew makes very different music than I do. And I'm a huge fan of Loud Son. And I was like really excited about like the mystery of like where it would go. Cause it was in the back of my mind this whole time. I was like, I wonder what Andrew's going to do with it. And the reality is that I gave him all these stems and stuff. And I was like giving him all our music. And then, I was also like feeling worried that I was like being too crazy with it. Like I had all these kind of like crazy instrumentations that got kind of like not simplified, but they kind of like got glued in like a way, and like kind of like pared down a little bit, but also accentuated in certain ways. Like, I don't know, Andrew just like took everything and could hear, or like had a really good ear for picking out things that should kind of like maybe be in the background or the foreground. I mean, like that's really hard for me. It's just, I mean, that sounds like classic basic mixing, but it's like the big science to like figuring out how things like come in together and like are voiced properly, and kind of like the intent of the song, you know, like does something get in the way? Is it too busy? Is there too much stuff going on in this one register? Is it kind of like competing, you know, our sounds? Is there like, are these sounds like, are these voices like working together? Are they, and I felt like I had kind of like spent so much time on my own listening to everything over and over again that I couldn't really do it anymore. And at some point you had to just like hand it over and be like, someone else has got to take a look. Someone else has got to take a look at this and like, give it to me straight, doc. It's like I
Mhm.
just need someone to like tell me if what I should do, but it I think he overall kind of like smoothed everything and kind
Mm.
of simplified it a bit, and kind of like knew what to bring in terms of like knew what to kind of highlight in the mix and how to make it sound right.
Yeah.
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 But I was there with it. He did a lot of it on his own, but we had like a couple mixing sessions where we were all there together.
Mm.
So yeah, we worked on it together. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I I should have asked this question a little sooner in the interview here, but talk to me about the places you were coming from as you were writing a lot of the lyrics for this record. I know you mentioned, some of it was, I was thinking of The Matrix, but some of these songs feel a little autobiographical. Some of them, are a little more abstract. And you obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it listens. The lyrics almost feel like I'm reading a journal where like every third page has been ripped out. So you're kind of left to really kind of fill in the blanks yourself. But kind of talk to me about where you were coming from as you're, writing a lot of the lyrics to these songs.
Yeah. Well, my like state of mind was that of like a person being like stuck inside
Mm.
alone all day. Or like I was coming from a place I have, because of many different reasons, like lived alone for a while.
Yeah.
And throughout the pandemic, that's been like a blessing and a curse. It's like I've spent just a lot of time on my own, and that's leads, inevitably to a lot of like self-reflection and
Mm.
contemplation. And I've had since 2020, three of my grandparents died.
Oh.
And there've been, yeah, some kind of like really tough family things
Mm.
and like grief, and kind of like, I don't know, I lost two of my grandparents within like 2 weeks in
Oh.
2020. And so like, I don't know, acute grief
Mm.
and like confusion, and also like a feeling of like a very elongated, stretched out, kind of like overrun, I don't know, kind of grief that's like seems to just like overtake such a long chunk of your life.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a weird kind of like short and long time of processing within the shadow of the pandemic, like
Mm.
um a lot of, yeah, a lot of feelings of like two sides to a coin, kind of like there's like
Yeah.
a dark side and a light side. I feel like a lot of relations of like shadow and light have kind of like
Hmm.
seeped their way into how I think of everything. Or like, like I'm looking at a flower right now that it was like was once like beautiful and like um full of water, and now it's like a desiccated
Hmm.
like decay, and so thinking too a lot about life cycles and like um an acceptance and acknowledgement, and also a rejection of like wonder and mystery, and like feeling lost and feeling found. And
Hmm.
I don't know, just kind of like very like existential, I would say, like very, very existential place. I mean, that's like probably duh. It's like duh.
Yeah.
Everyone's existential about their music in some kind of way, but thinking in the lens of like those kind of like big, life death
Hmm.
matters. And like lyrically, like another day is about that, and kind of
Hmm.
like also the seasonality, like the like dysfunctional feelings of being stuck in like a winter in Minnesota that's like
Yeah.
most of the year,
Yeah.
and then but still seeing like, so kind of like finding moments of hopefulness. um or something like Window Seat is kind of about like liminality or
Mm.
like mystery, and like being like, yeah, like literally being on a plane and being like in the clouds, or like being in like a subterranean kind of place with windows into like the ground, or like also like crossing thresholds, like crossing into like like feelings and experiences where you like have nothing guiding you, and you kind of have to like just do it and jump into something that's really scary but also really magical. And yeah, a lot of like also my like Hey Neighbor is kind of like walking around the neighborhood that I live in St. Paul, like Walgreens and like the church that I live by, and like the hardware store. During the pandemic, I started going to the hardware store a lot because it was like a fun place to go. I don't know. Hardware stores are awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And like, Radio Shack is probably the most that's the most autobiographical one. It's like it's about me and my dad. Like after school, my dad and I would sometimes go to Radio Shack. There was this Radio Shack by my house growing up. We just kind of like look around in there, and that was like a fun thing to do after school. Or just like if we found a Radio Shack at a mall. He's kind of like he's a person that's like really into robots and like tech stuff in like a super nerdy way. And so we'd go to Radio Shack, and then more than once this happened that I followed a different adult man out of the store because they looked exactly the same. They were wearing like the same Wrangler shorts and like long white socks and like the same shoes, and had like such a similar look, and like being like a kid, like a kid, you like think you're following your dad out of the store, and you like grab their hand or something, and then you look up and it's like, that's not your dad. And that feeling, like that happened to me quite a few times, and it was like a strong memory for me. But yeah, like little kind of like stories like that make their way, I think, into every song, probably more than I even realize. I'm kind of like analyzing it now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I did write that song about that. And like Little Grain of Sand is like this song about, kind of in a broader sense, about water. My mom's family's Puerto Rican, and I have thought a lot about like my family in the last few years, and kind of like where I consider myself to be from, and just like thinking about like a vast expanse of water that's like got all this sand in it. Yeah. And like being like living by the Mississippi. I don't know. Yeah. Just like thinking about things on a small kind of like granular scale, and zooming out and being like, whoa, everything's like unimaginably vast. So yeah.
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 Oh, cool.
A lot.
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Oh yeah. It's just like a lot of me like dealing with my own like wonder, like my I don't know, my like curiosities of being a human and stuff.
Yeah. Almost a lot of it, or not, I shouldn't say a lot of it, but like thinking through the way you're describing it, like kind of figuring out where you connect within the world, and how can you orient yourself among things, like, throwing yourself into a scary situation, or like, Hey Neighbor is like, you're connecting with the various people you make eye contact with when you're walking around the neighborhood. It makes so much sense, especially when you think of like the existential nature of the music you write.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, like Hey Neighbor and like Window Seats got this too, but like being seen, or like seeing people, especially like through a window, I think that's kind of like an overarching theme in the album. Like, and that's why I like decided to title it that, is because like you spend a lot of your life just looking through windows. Like even if it's not even a physical window, you just like have all these windows you can look into.
Yeah.
And then all at the same time, like you're being seen through all these lenses and all these windows, and like all the fragmentations of that, and all the different ways that can mean.
We've already kind of touched on it a bit here during the conversation, but I was wondering, since you learned a lot of the instruments outside of obviously cello for to make these songs. It's both, synths and guitar. How did that impact your songwriting process? Because it's not like you're coming at these instruments with years of knowledge behind it. Obviously, you knew music, but how did that impact the way you wrote within this pop kind of context?
It really was very frustrating at times,
Mhm.
especially with guitar. Guitar did not come naturally to me at all at the beginning. And I was having kind of like dreams of playing certain chord progressions or like achieving something harmonically that I knew I could do on cello,
Mm.
but I like wanted it to be on guitar. So I like because of my, it was nice to have a background of like music theory
Yeah.
and like also being a person who listens to a lot of music, like having a vision or like having something in my ears that I like knew I could get to if I just practiced enough. Like
Mhm.
another kind of like, kind of like a definitely a vestige of like my youth, with practicing cello. I kind of like did accept and like ultimately like, yeah, I just accepted that I needed to practice guitar for like 8 hours a day to get to like be able to play something,
Mhm.
and that was like the harsh reality of it. But I also had a fair amount of time to do that. So I was like happy to do it, and also kind of got lost in that process.
Mhm.
And eventually it wasn't like a frustrating task for me to get done. It was like a process of like, okay, I have no idea how I'm going to do this on guitar, but this is what I want it to sound like. And like just kind of letting myself like experiment with that.
Mhm.
And like also just fortunately like happen upon things that I wasn't coming to the guitar thinking about. Like
Yeah.
a lot of these songs like started out one way, but also like were totally transformed by my own limitations to figure things out on guitar and synths. And they just like had to kind of like meander into a different territory. Um, and I'm really kind of thankful that I had like no previous experience with guitar and synths because it really made me rethink a lot of things.
Mhm.
And that was honestly like one of my roadblocks with cello is because I felt like I knew it so well that I was kind of like unauthentically approaching experimentation on it.
Mhm.
Like I felt like it was kind of a contrived endeavor for me to
Yeah.
like figure out some like weird thing on cello because I like knew everything I was doing and I like felt like I like quote unquote understood, but
Mhm.
with guitar and synth, it's like, no, I actually have no idea. So it takes the pressure off too at some point if you don't take yourself too seriously. I
Mhm.
think that was like important for me is to just like kind of ultimately be like, I want to have fun doing this. It's
Yeah.
not about having to prove my skills at being an instrumentalist or something.
Mhm.
And that was important. Yeah.
There's such a creative freedom within the limitation of skill because you have this like, especially with you're so well versed on cello, you're like, yeah, I get this. I know what I'm doing, and everything I do kind of feels like I'm doing something else that I've already worked on. But
Mhm.
having this ability to just kind of like mess around, and you're truly like, I have never done this before, and so this is all new, gives you that ability to really kind of work in a new way.
Totally. Yeah. And I also like experimented with guitars. Like I tried some open tunings or I
Mm.
tried some tunings where I actually didn't know if what it was, but I would just kind of retune and kind of see. One second, I'm just going to ask my dog to kindly stop crying. His name's Taffy. Um, he's my true inspiration, actually. But yeah, to just kind of like also freely be like, okay, uh, this instrument can do many different things. What can I like try? Yeah, just like how
Yeah.
can I make it different? I don't know. Like, and that got me just very thankfully more interested in cello too. Just kind of like that cyclical kind of like, okay, now I feel like I can kind of return to cello. Not that I ever really like truly left it.
Yeah.
But I can like approach it now with like a little bit more humility or something. Like I can kind of just like accept a lot of sounds and kind of be like inspired by different sounds from all over the place and just like try things with less parameters. I don't know.
Yeah. So moving away from discussion about the record itself, got a few more questions here. Aura Vortex put out this record, and you have a history working with the label. You put out your record solo, as well as both Todd and Liam have, stuff on this. So talk to me about how you connected with that label.
I know Emily through my relationship with Todd. And so Emily and I've known Emily for a while. And she has like, I don't know, a lot of skill in like putting together projects and like being like, well, kind of like forming really positive connections in the music community and kind of like being able to also feel confident promoting. Like, I don't know, she's just really good at a lot of things and like kind of like started this record label to kind of like, I don't know, have like bands that were already friends and like, playing in each other's projects and just have it like more of like a backing of support, just like as a kind of community or a collective. And yeah, she asked me if I was interested in releasing music on it. And I thought that was a great idea. I hadn't, like, before that moment, I was like, oh, I don't know. I had a very kind of like independent way of thinking about my music making that was like kind of solitary. And it was like a nice reminder and like a nudge to like remember to like enjoy making music with people and to like, I don't know, work together in promoting things that you're excited about because you genuinely want to share it and you want to do well at it and like feel excited about all these different things going on too, like with your friends' projects. And it was like a very wholesome kind of like natural move to like be like supporting each other's projects in like that kind of like Aura Vortex friend musician group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. And so I just have a few questions left here because this basically wraps up all of the hard-hitting questions you get here on Your Coffee. But where can people connect with you online if they want to know about what's going on with Spaceport, any gigs you got coming up, any new music you got in the works?
Yeah. The best place to stay up to date about Spaceport stuff is probably our Instagram, which is at Spaceport Band, where we kind of like, I don't know, I feel like that's where I'm mostly sharing things about our updates. We have a Facebook page. It's the same thing, Spaceport Band. We have a website too, spaceport.band. And then our Bandcamp is like a nice hub too for like any releases that we have going on. And yeah, that's just spaceport.bandcamp.com. I recently made a Twitter, but who knows? I don't know. I don't stay up to date on Twitter very well. And like, I was like addicted to it in high school. So I like sometimes like refrain from just tweeting random stuff on Twitter. But that's a more unreliable source for Spaceport happenings. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, the record is called Window Seat. It's out now via Aura Vortex Record. You should go to your Bandcamp, pick up a CD. The record is fantastic. I loved listening to it. Ariana, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me here today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. This was really fun and very nice to be here.
The Your Coffee podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @EarCoffee. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.